Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by Ellen Massell, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargent. Let's get started. Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Now, as a society, discrimination and diversity are topics that we are trying to learn to understand and even acknowledge. But while we're learning about it, what are we teaching our own kids? And what do we teach our kids if they are facing examples of discrimination? Those are our questions within today's topic. And now to help us explore it even further is clinical psychologist Dr. Alvin Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me, Alvin.
Thank you so much for having me, Dina.
Now, as a clinical psychologist, what is your role in helping parents teach their children about discrimination?
So if you had asked me that question a few years ago, I might have told you that my work would be specifically in the therapy space, in the therapy room, working directly with parents and with children and with families in general. And at this point, though, my work has extended beyond the individualistic and family-focused work, and instead focusing on answering the larger questions that would influence that work that others would be doing in the therapy room and influencing policy related to these issues. So a lot of my work now is working in the community with community groups and with families, so in context, but also doing some of the hard research in trying to understand different lenses on this issue for policymakers, for practitioners, for teachers, and others in different spaces.
And in your work, what has been some of the most common frustrations parents and sometimes children face when trying to understand and teach discrimination?
I think sometimes it's identifying discrimination, so children often aren't quite aware that discrimination is happening. They know that something is off, that something is wrong in that interaction, but they can't always identify that language. And for parents, they might be able to, based on their own previous experiences, be able to identify again that something is wrong, but trying to convince the system that something that there's some wrong that has been visited upon them or upon their child in the interactions. That's always challenging. That's it's called, give me a couple of seconds before the name boots up into my mind, microaggressions. So it's often trying to determine between microaggressions and overt acts of discrimination and trying to process that through the interactions with institutions.
Okay. No, there's a lot of different topics that you just mentioned there that we are definitely going to go through even further. But before we do, I love to start off with a little bit of a game to sort of get to know some of your recommendations and some of your interests as well. Now, to start off with, what is the most recent book that you've read?
Oh, the most recent book that I've read. How far back do I have to go? So we read a couple of books for the podcast. So for example, we read the American Family by Santee Elijah Hawley that talks about the experiences of Tupac Shakur and the Shakur family. How Far from the Promised Land, or How Far to the Promised Land, by Santee Elijah Hawley. No, Santee Elijah Hawley is the American Family. That's the Tupac Shakur and the Shakur family. And How Far to the Promised Land is the almost autobiographical story novel by Issa Macaulay about his own experiences with his father.
Mm-hmm. No, those sound really interesting, especially talking about your own podcast as well, which sort of deals with a lot of different issues as similar to what we're talking about today. Those are definitely some very good books for us to maybe list out in the show notes, and maybe list out for other people to sort of look deeper into it as well, because I think those definitely show some examples of discrimination in a real world example as well. So no, I think those two would be a great read to maybe list out for us as well.
Yep, I can share with you some of the. I have a couple of authors. For example, there's Jamal, and Jamal's there are two Black men in I think at Loyola High School in Los Angeles, who are working together at a high school, an all boys prep school, Black boys, and they're doing just interesting work with regard to both helping these kids get into college, but also preparing them for that long journey of dealing with race in the U.S., but also doing a really interesting job around conversation and literature and work and how to kind of tell stories. Mm-hmm. They've written as well. I have a couple of other books I think that would be really interesting to your audience.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'd love to, maybe we can get resources from you later on as well, sort of looking deeper into it, because I think resources are always really helpful in so many different ways. Now, what is a movie that you would recommend to our viewers today?
Oh, I don't know if I want to recommend any movies to them. The movies I often watch, I think are sometimes very scary. They're my escape from reality, even though they're sometimes very could be very traumatic. I think the last one I watched was a movie with Jamie Foxx. In fact, I watched that this weekend on Netflix, The Burial, which is a really powerful story.
Yeah, no, I think my dad has recommended for me to watch that as well. He's got very similar taste to yours. It's definitely not a family time movie, I will say that. But it is something that I have gotten recommended by him that is really showing the power in so many different ways. So I've got that on my list, and I'm desperately going to watch that now that you've recommended it as well.
It actually fits really nicely with this conversation.
That's what he said when I did pose this topic to him today on the weekend. He definitely said that this movie was going to be one of them. So the fact that he mentioned it and you mentioned it is definitely saying something.
Your father's a brilliant man.
I can't disagree because he watches this, so I can't say no to that. Now, do you have a podcast that really stands out to you that you could share with us?
Yes, the Black Fatherhood Podcast.
I was waiting for that.
I mean, I think when I think of where, and I mean, there are other podcasts that I think are really great, but when I think of where the Black Fatherhood Podcast started, and it sounds a little bit selfish, but I really do want to highlight the work that the podcast does and aims to do. And I think it's beyond just a conversation. There's a moral imperative for the podcast. There's a cultural imperative that the podcast fills, and there's a certain sense of an upliftment that and empowerment that the podcast gap that the podcast fills. So the Black Fatherhood Podcast, EVE, as I sometimes call it, EVE, to educate, validate, and elevate Black fatherhood. That is, to me, a very noble goal, and to engage conversations with a range of people from a cross-section of society in conversation that highlights an underserved group in a marginalized, in a further marginalized group, and that deliberately attempts to center their story, not from the point of view of voyeurism, where we just sit and, oh, look at these issues, oh, isn't that sad, and then we're done. It's how do we center these issues as a way of empowering the individual, empowering the family, but also of hopefully being able to change minds on a societal level and hopefully lead to some kinds of policy changes. And I think because the podcast has been able to do that over the last year and a half, since we've existed, and that the public is beginning to recognize it. We just recently won 3 different awards for the podcast. We got a Signals Gold Award in Signal Gold Award in the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion category. Got Listener's Choice as well in that same category, and were voted the best parenting and family and parenting podcast by Black Pod. And I think we might be up for an additional award again. But just being able to get that sense of recognition for the work that's been done, and still recognizing the amount of work that still is left to be done. So much uncharted territory in that space.
No, the congratulations on that. I definitely know how hard that is to do. So that is quite an achievement, especially to be recognized by listeners. I think that's the biggest one. For me, that sounds like the most important one, because it definitely sounds like it's being recognized, which is great.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
No, so I'll definitely have that link down below as well. Maybe we can get listeners even more. Now, who is a person that you find yourself looking up to, either in your professional life or even your personal life?
I think it would probably be different people. And I can think of a number of people who have whose lives have served as inspiration to me, both on a professional and on a personal level. I think of my father, who parented without context or without frame of reference. He never knew his father, still does not definitively know his father. And he attempted to step into the role of father for multiple children, and made a lot of mistakes along the way, and owned those mistakes and attempted to right some of them when possible, and was doing the best that he could with what little he had. And I think he did a fine job. Are there things that I'm healing from? Yes. Are there things that we're all healing from at one level, at one level or point from another? Yes, there's always going to be something that we have to move from as we go into our lives. So I think of my father as being a person who could have decided to stay exactly where he started, but chose to push beyond where society and where his beginnings suggested that he should have been going, and did a really good job, I think, with my brothers and sisters and myself. When I think of my academic development, I can't think of anybody except for Cleopatra Caldwell. Cleopatra Caldwell, who was my graduate school mentor, who just shepherded me through this space, this academic space. And it is from her that I started doing this fatherhood work. I went in first just doing kid work and thinking that's all I was going to do. And then I heard her talk about her work during a presentation, and the light bulb hit. I was like, oh my God, that is what I want to do. I want to do fatherhood work. I want to do work that support and strengthens Black fathers. And I've not stopped since then. And we remain in contact. And I see myself as taking the work from where she just retired this summer. And I see myself as picking up the mantle, taking the baton from where she left off, and pushing the envelope to the next stage. And hopefully some of my grad students and others that I interact with, when I kind of start to phase off the scene, will take it and bring it to another level.
No, that is incredible. I think to have both people, both personally and professionally, there's so many different mentors, and for you to list 2 of them that really made an impact in your life, I think that's incredible. I agree. There's no one person that sort of mentor that sort of fits in that role with who I look up to personally. But I would definitely say when it comes to professionally, that is such a great way of sort of picking up where she left off and bringing it even closer, and inspiring so many different fathers who are of minority that aren't really looked upon, that aren't really seen as built upon. So no, it is incredible to see. And that's exactly why we brought you onto the show, because it's definitely something that we want to highlight on our show. So no, that is definitely incredible. Now, during your academic pursuit, do you have one course that has really stuck to you and changed the way that you think?
I think most people, if you ask them this question, they'll probably talk about their favorite course. I'll tell you instead about my worst course.
Okay.
And how that worst course has really inspired me. It was Statistics 101. It wasn't 101. It was the very basic statistics class, the first of 2 or 3 stats classes that you take in grad school. And I remember going into that class, and I still remember the professor. We're still good friends now. I won't call his name, but I would go to class every week and I would be stumped. I would sit in class and feel like an idiot. It just didn't make sense. And I was convinced, I think that was probably when the imposter syndrome was probably, or loomed probably largest for me. I was convinced that everybody was going to know that I did not belong here and that I didn't have what it took and that they were going to eventually rescind my scholarship and kick me out of grad school and I would be such a failure. And I didn't think that grad school was for me. I think there are a lot of people who find themselves pursuing big dreams, big goals. And at the beginning of the pursuit, I think we often assume that we're going in fully competent as a person who has completed the goal. And if you're a first generation person in that space, even more so you think, because I've worked so hard to get to this point, I should be significantly competent and should not be struggling. And then you hit that first round of struggle and that second round of struggle and that third round of struggle. And you start to think to yourself that this is not for me. Who am I fooling? These people are probably very aware that I don't belong here and they're just watching and waiting for me to fall out. I stuck with it. I didn't do as well as I wanted in that course, but I decided that I was going to do better in the second course, and I did better in the second course. And sticking with every failure, every disappointment through that course and subsequent courses that sometimes were a little bit more challenging, I look back now and I think to myself, how different would this field be if my voice was not part of it? How different would the research be if my voice was not part of it? How different would practice be if there were families and the kids and families I've worked with if I had not stuck with that particular course through that particular experience? And so I love that difficult experience, that difficult course, because of what it taught me, because of what it taught me about myself, because of how it forced me to move beyond what I thought should be comfortable and into what is, and embracing that discomfort.
No, I think that's a great way of putting it, especially in a way when you think that course definitely humbled a lot of your experiences and a lot of what you knew, a lot of the fact that you're supposed to be, because you're the first one in your generation, in your family to go to college and first one to sort of build up, there's sort of that expectation that you're having to be the best at everything because everyone has made sacrifices for you to do it. And then there's that, I definitely feel that, I felt that relatability to that because I'm the first one in my family to go graduate beyond graduating high school. So there's that whole understanding that, okay, I'm also having to be a role model for my younger sister who wants to sort of go further. And now that when I finished my master's, there is that whole understanding of, okay, I'm definitely, even after a master's, I'm still not prepared for a lot of it. So while I'm building up even further and learning a bit more about myself, there's that whole understanding that, okay, I don't need to know everything. I don't need to be perfect at things, but I can definitely try harder. Yeah. So I definitely relate when you said that, because I think there's that whole, it's definitely harder when you have no one in your family understanding the same experiences.
I mean, every so often my parents will keep asking me. I think they've stopped a little bit, but they used to ask me all the time what I'm doing and what's next. And the number of times I've tried to explain to them and to others what I'm doing, and it just does not click. because that is not their experience. And hopefully I can explain it to my niece and nephew. My nephew is now 18 years old and thinking of going to college. The idea of going to college was not a thing that we considered. My parents talked about my brother and I going to high school and getting past high school. And once we got past high school and got government jobs, to them, they had achieved nirvana. They had reached heaven, because that was a thing that was unheard of in my family. And then I said I wanted to get a college degree. And then I said I wanted to get a PhD. And they're like, why? And so now my niece and nephew don't think of college as this far removed thing. It's almost inevitable. I want to go to college. I want to go to university. But as a pioneer who's cutting that new path, it's a lot to carry. And most people don't even realize that you're carrying it. And you yourself might not even realize that you're carrying the weight of generations before and generations to come. And what that must mean to carry that on a day-to-day basis as you're going through the normal struggles of graduate school or the normal struggles of this new job or this new space that you're in. And sometimes the spaces are not always the most friendly to you or to your identities, and how to exist in those spaces that may not be friendly to your different identities.
No, that's very true. And especially when sort of teaching kids about so many different things and so many different viewpoints as well, I think is the most difficult part, because especially when they grew up seeing one experience, one viewpoint, sort of teaching them that there's other ways to think. And especially I think that's what I learned from college. That's what I learned from university, and sort of going in even further. Now, I know that so talking about parenting, I know that parenting has a very different definition as to what it is to everybody. What would you say your definition of parenting and being the role as a parent be?
Ooh, that's a very loaded question. So when I think of parenting, I start with the child. So the parent is coming in. I think we often think of those two individuals as very disparate and yet overlapping. So we think of the parent as a person who has become a parent. And it starts at that point when you become a parent and moving forward. And the child comes in and then you move forward. I think of parenting going back to the parent's own childhood. So as you come into parenting, there's a history of who you are and what you've been before you became a parent, and that informs how you're going to parent. But when I think of parenting from the point of view of the interaction between the child and the adult, it's a commitment to preparing an individual for lifelong success. It's a commitment to presenting and tooling an individual for achieving their best selves, for surviving their environment, for being able to process the environment within which they exist. And I think of it as an interactive process. There's stuff that the interaction is bidirectional. So the way the parent interacts with the child is going to affect how the child responds to the parent. And the way the child responds to the parent or reacts with the parent can also impact how the parent chooses to respond to the child. So it's an interactive process where primarily the adult is responsible for facilitating the optimal growth of an individual so that they can be their best selves.
So it's a lot more than just, okay, I'm going to guide you until you become an adult, and then you're on your own figuring things out. It's way beyond that. It's looking deeper into, okay, who do we want them to be? Do we want them to be good people? Do we want them to learn from a lot of the things that we did as an adult, as a child, that we want to? Because I know, like, there are some answers that I have on the show where it comes like, we want them to know what we did and make sure they do better. However, there's a lot of experiences, especially in real life, where somehow we have that expectation that they're going to be more than us. And like I've been through that experience personally when growing up, having that expectation that I'm going to be more than what my parents were, and my parents making sure that I was going to be more than that. However, with that expectation came a lot of forceful acts and forceful things. Okay, you're going to completely focus on studying. You're not going to do anything but study, especially during high school when I'm being dyslexic as well became even harder for me. So that was even a more difficulty that was put on when it came to high school. So when dealing with that experience, there's a whole lot of, okay, well, we want them to, their whole idea was for me to be the best that I can be. But the underlying mission for them was to make sure that I was better than them. But with that came a whole lot of expectation that, okay, you're going to put 100% into everything that you do. You're not going to work outside of school. You're not going to have a social life. I was homeschooled in high school years. So there was that full on expectation that I'm going to do nothing but study, which burnt me out by the time I was 21.
I think there's a difference between I want my child to be the best they can be and I want my child to be the best at a particular thing or particular things. Mm-hmm. If you want your child to be the best they can be, you give them what it takes to drive that curiosity, and then you gradually step back and have them discover what it is that they're interested in. So I might have a son, and I might think to myself, I want my son to be the best football player, or I want my son to be the best academic, the best psychologist. He's going to have his PhD by the time he's 24. He's going to be a really young PhD person. He's going to have a job at one of the best universities. He's going to write our R21 grants and R01 grants by the time he's 30 years old. And all of that is wonderful. But is that what my son wants? Mm-hmm. Those are different measures of success that I have taken upon myself, and I have to ask myself, why is that so important for me? And then ask myself, how much of this is me imposing on my son or on my child, and how much of this is something that my child wants? So I have a friend who has a little girl, and she says, essentially, the way she raises this 3-year-old is, whatever she wants to do, I will support her in doing it. But when she goes into it, she has to give her full. And if she's no longer interested in giving her full, then we find what the next thing is. So she had her doing ballet at 2 years old, and she was tapping around and running around and enjoying herself. And then she kept doing ballet, but she started wanting to learn to swim. So she put her in swimming classes, and she's loving it. And she has her doing some art classes, and she's loving that. And she does some work with her father on toy cars and building puzzles, and she loves that. And so what this friend of mine is doing is providing for this child this rich environment of learning and exploration, where the child eventually starts to feel comfortable going out and exploring new ideas. And eventually, the thing that really gravitates to that child's soul, to that child's sense of being and purpose, will eventually come across them, or they will come across it, and they will feel more prepared to gravitate to that thing without fearing it. Mm-hmm. What sometimes happens is when we push our children so hard towards a particular thing, when their thing shows up, they're afraid, because all they know about hard work is what we showed them. Mm-hmm. That it is this overwhelming, kind of oppressive experience. And so they get afraid of going out and trying new things. But our job as parents, the parenting job, is to create within the child and to kind of spur this spirit of curiosity and then set the child loose on the world to find different things with that curiosity.
And when it comes to new parents as well, the expectant parent, what is something that they should be aware of in their transition to parenthood?
I think, there's so much. It's a really loaded question because, you could think of like, what is it from the point of view of biology, psychology, race? There are so many different spaces of expectation and what you're doing transitioning into that space. One of the guests on my podcast, Thelonious Monk, talked about the beauty of parenting. And he says, in paraphrasing it, that one of the beauties of parenting, he gives the caveat and says that if you're going into parenting with the assumption that one day this young person will be responsible for taking care of you when you get older and they can repay you, blah, 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 then you might be very disappointed because they may choose not to want to take care of you. And that's a very valid choice for an individual to make. Is it the kind of choice that society generally would appreciate? No. Is it a valid choice for an individual to make? Yes, an individual could make that choice. So he says, be careful that when you're going into parenting, that is not your role. You're not going into parenting as an insurance policy for yourself. But the beauty of parenting, he says, is being able to experience multiple firsts with that human being. The first ice cream cone, the first M&Ms, the first night out, the first fish that they catch, the first ball that they catch, the first slide down a slide, the first rain, the first dancing in the rain, the first song. So many different firsts that we've become a little bit more jaded as adults because those things don't entice us anymore. Whatever. It's the first thing. I have bigger fish to fry. But for a kid who's going through these periods of past their innocence, you get to experience that all over again as a parent. Embrace those firsts and embrace those experiences because they often will only come by once. So look out for them and enjoy them.
That's the first time I've ever heard that as an answer to that question, because I think that's something that we sort of, like you said, we take it for granted quite often. We take that experience, especially just small things like, okay, the first time we had crunchy food, or the first time we had chips, first time we tried chips, all those very normal things that we find in everyday life. Somehow there's becomes that romanticizing of all of it all over again. So no, that is definitely a great answer to that question. Now we're going to go a little bit deeper in talking about our topic today. Before we get into that, what would a definition of discrimination be to you?
I think these things are often very difficult to experientially. They might have different shades of meaning, but if I think we were to kind of look for more like a lexical academic meaning for discrimination, I would say it is the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people, especially that when that prejudicial or unjust treatment is based on ethnicity, age, sex, disability, or some other form of phenotypical difference.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how can positive parenting sort of counter the understanding of discrimination?
I think it is the parent's responsibility. But I'll backtrack. In another podcast, I talked about this, that it's one thing for kids to go out there and experience discrimination or experience something that's not, go through an experience that's not salubrious, healthy, or kind of supportive of who they are. It's another thing for that child to come home and not feel that unconditional positive regard. There's this old study that looks at attachment in children, and essentially it's you put a 2-year-old in a room with their parent and you watch to see what that child does. A child that has a healthy attachment to the parent will go out and explore the room and will pick up something, will pick up a toy or something in the room, and will always bring that toy back to the parent as if to say, here's what I discovered. And to them, it might be a discovery. Oh my God, here's this thing I discovered. Here, help me make sense. When the kid is giving that toy or that thing to their parent, whether it be the mother or the father, essentially what the child is saying is, here is this thing that might be novel to me, at least in this situation. Help me make sense of it. And a good parent, an attentive parent, will pick it up and say, oh, and will use language to help the child. Language and inflection. Oh, you found a ball. It's a pretty ball. The child picks up a number of messages. One, that thing that I just picked up and walked over to my parent with, it's not dangerous. It's not going to kill me. It's not going to hurt me. Two, my parent is also excited by it. So now we have a shared experience. And now they're giving me language. They're giving me thoughts about it. And as soon as the child realizes, okay, I'm good, they leave the parent and they go find something else. And they bring it back to the parent. A similar thing happens with experiences beyond the preschool ages. When the child gets to school age, the child goes off to school, hangs out at school with their peers, and they come back home and say, hey, mom, or hey, dad, here's what happened at school. The teacher said blah, 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 and James said blah, 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 and Sarah said blah, blah, blah. Essentially, what the child is doing is saying, here are my experiences. I want to see how you respond to them. If the parent says, your teacher said what? The kid gets an understanding that there's something concerning in that experience. Or the child might come home and say that this was a concerning experience for me. I don't know why my friend said this, but my friend said, I heard a girl or a boy say that they don't like Black people, or they don't like Asian people, or whatever group. And it is the parent's responsibility now to help the child make sense of that experience. And there are ways that can be done appropriately and in a supportive way for that child. And there are ways that can be done in such a way to the detriment of the child.
So there's a difference between saying, okay, this is what people shouldn't be saying, but it's different when you're sort of laughing it off and taking it as a joke. So there's a very big reaction difference between what the child would understand. Okay, say for example, the kid comes home and the mom is hearing that the child is hearing from a friend that's saying, I don't like Asian people, for example. If the mom's perspective and her reaction to it is very is very important at that very moment to sort of help the child understand what is right and wrong.
Yeah. So I think even before the mom finds out how the child feels about it, the mom has to be prepared for that. So in my clinical training, one of the things that we would say is, before your client comes into therapy, there are things that you should have dealt with already on your own as a person. So if you have issues with your own parenting, you should have already spent some time dealing with that, so that if your parent, or if not your parent, but if the parent or if your client brings up something that is personal to you, or that you can connect to, you don't have a transference where you transfer your experience onto the client, or counter transfer. You avoid a counter transference where the client transfers their experience onto you. So you become now the dad that they have issues with, or the mom that they're having issues with. So if a child is coming in and say, hey mom, my friend says they don't like Asian people. And the mom responds with, well, how dare they? Or some kind of response like that. What it's saying is, what it tells the child first and foremost is my experience is what matters here. Because I don't even know how it hit you, how it impacted you. I go straight to me. When I say how dare they, what I'm saying is I feel hurt by what was just said. And I have totally ignored the fact that this was your experience. So I have to be able to step back and say, oh, this is my kid's experience. And before I center my own feelings on this, I need to know, because my kid just went through this. Mm-hmm. And so my first response would not be, how dare they? My first response would be like, how did that make you feel? I want to center you. This is about you. And what happened next? And what is happening? I want you to help me set the stage for what's going on. Now, in my private space with my partner or by myself, I might be saying, how dare they? One, how dare they say that about Asians? But two, how dare they say that to my kid? Mm-hmm. But that's a thing for me to deal with, not for my child. Because otherwise, what I've done now is I've taken an experience that the child has had, a negative experience, and I've compounded it now with my own experience. And I've forced my child to now have to deal with both experiences.
Mm-hmm. And I guess it sort of stops the child from mentioning it to you, and if it happens again as well, seeing that's what your reaction would be. So no, that would make a lot of sense, especially sort of, it can be really tied, especially that sort of interaction can be tied easily to experience such as bullying as well, when it comes to what the parents experience, what the child's experience should be. So there's a little bit of overlap when it comes to, from at least what I'm understanding of it, there's a little bit of an overlap when it comes to the parent's reaction to certain things. Okay.
Which is why when you asked earlier about what parents should know about that transition into parenting, mm-hmm. It is being very aware of yourself. And again, I don't think any one of us is completely aware of everything at every time, but being so in tune with yourself and being so ready to do that personal work with yourself so that when it does come up, you can actually address it. Now, it doesn't mean that, so for example, if I had a kid and my kid came home and said this particular bullying incident happened to them, and it was attached to race, my first instinct might be like, what the hell? Like that was my, well, maybe I shouldn't say hell, but
that's fine.
let's cut out the hell. But I might say like, why would you, like, why? Like, who would think that they could do this to my kid or have this experience imposed on my kid? And then I might come back and say, you know what? I'm very sorry that was my response. I should have actually listened to you. So there's a really beautiful learning experience here that I want this to be about you. This was about you. And I did not mean to impose my own experience on it. And so we spent some time talking about you. And then it's a way to let you know that I am normal. I am a human being. I did have an emotional reaction, but I also want you to know that your experiences are central and are meaningful and are valid.
Mm-hmm. Now, to provide some context, could you define what discrimination in children refers to?
I think discrimination looks pretty similar in children. It's the unfair, unjust treatment. Okay. And because it's a child's world, it might look different. So for example, if my friends decide that they're not going, if my colleagues at work decide that they're not going to invite me to the happy hour on a Friday afternoon, I would not care. Mm-hmm. Because the happy hour doesn't mean anything to me. I don't care. I would be happy to go home and drink my wine by myself if I need to. I don't need a happy hour from anybody to be able to enjoy myself. But if a child is on the playground and all of the kids are there, there's the need for that peer interaction. And if somebody says, you can't play with us because you're disabled or because you're a particular race or some other form of phenotypic difference, that level of isolation is significant that level of you're different and you're defective is very, could be very devastating for a child. So that looks very different for children versus for adults. But the experience of feeling like there is an unjust treatment or an unequal treatment. I mean, monkeys know the difference. You give one monkey 3 grapes and you give another one 1 grape, and they freak out because they understand that that's unequal. You give 2 children, you give one of them 5 M&Ms and you give the other one 1 M&M. They know that something is wrong. That does not, they may not have the language for it, but they know that is not fair. And so for a child to experience that something is unfair, but they may not know why. But then if we were to use the language to actually tell them why, it is because you're short, or it's because you're black, or because you're Asian, or because you're a girl. That, I think, is what the discrimination experiences looks like for children. Okay. I mean, it gets a little bit more complex as you go through the ages, though.
Yeah. So what are some signs that parents should look for in whether their child is sort of experiencing or dealing with the impact of discrimination set upon them?
So I think the depending on what ages you're looking at, is school age all the way to teenage years, high school. For younger kids, even for older kids, it might look like, I would look for drastic changes in behavior.
Okay.
Which is similar to what you would see for most other problems. So a child who used to be outgoing and has suddenly become very withdrawn. A child who had a certain friend group and suddenly they're not talking about those friends anymore. A child who has become very irritable. Anything that looks like a child who's deciding that they don't want to go to school, or crying, or talking about stomach aches or headaches that don't really exist, but it's always around the time that they have to go to school. You're looking for some of those drastic changes in behavior. And in some cases, not even drastic, subtle changes in behavior.
Okay. And what are some of the emotional impacts of a child dealing with discrimination?
I mean, I think probably one of the first ones would probably be something akin to depression. It may not necessarily reach the point of depression, but a significant change in mood. Okay. So a child who's, like I said at the beginning, spending a lot more time on their own, spending more time in their room, who's become emotionally withdrawn, verbally withdrawn. Flip might also happen where the child becomes a lot more aggressive, the child becomes a lot more irritable. All of those are potential signs that there's something, essentially what a child is telling you is something about my view of the world has shifted. I used to think of the world as this fair, lovely, balanced place, and something has shifted, and I don't know how to quite make sense of it yet. So it's thrown my whole my whole aura, my whole sense of self off kilter.
And because we know that discrimination comes in various different ways and is felt because of various different reasons. How can parents sort of approach the discussion on discrimination, whether it's related to either race, gender, religion, or even some other points?
I think so. Often parents, sometimes parents have the mistaken belief that you have a conversation with a child and then that's the end of it. So I talk to them about cleaning their room, and I do it once, twice, and they should get it. From now on, the rooms will always be clean. I talk to them about brushing their teeth once, twice, and from then on, they always brush their teeth on time and it's always done properly. No, if anything, any parent will tell you, any parent who's had at least one kid will tell you that they say the same thing over and over and over again until that child gets it, until it makes sense. It's the same thing with dealing with discrimination. We often talk about the talk, especially for racially marginalized kids, having the talk. The talk is not the talk. It's a continuous thing. It's a process. So you may have the talk today and you may have to have it again next week. Or you may have to have it 5 times this week, because in 5 different spaces, that has become salient for that kid or for that child. So recognizing that the talk is an ongoing conversation, that you're going to have this multiple times, and that it's a conversation that you have to first be comfortable having. You can't have the talk, you can't have this open access, this open space for communication unless you feel comfortable with it, because kids are such a great barometer for our own emotions. They can tell when we're uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And if we're uncomfortable with something, what it's telling them is, I should not, they're trying to take care of us while we're trying to take care of them. And so like, whenever I bring this up, mom gets really nervous. Mom or dad gets really angry. So they're going to stop bringing it to you. Mm-hmm. And they're going to try to figure out how to make it on their own, how to deal with this on their own, which could be very problematic. But I think being ready to have those conversations and being aware that those conversations are going to have to be continuous. I mean, there are a number of other points that I could give, but I think those are the tip of the iceberg of points.
Mm-hmm. So it's about sort of not really showing a lot of what the anger that you feel as a parent, and sort of just, okay, but you can talk to it about your spouse, about your partner, and discuss it at length. But when it comes to a child, there's some things that you're meant to sort of keep hidden and not really show a lot of your own sort of, it could be your own experiences, it could be your own trauma in that discussion. So how would you go ahead and keep that open-ended discussion and sort of allow the child to know that they can always just come and tell you whatever and know that you're not going to react very quickly?
So I think that conversation looks different depending on the child's developmental stage.
Okay.
So you want to make sure you're using age-appropriate language. So for a 5-year-old who says, Billy pushed me off the swing and use a slur, mm-hmm. I want to use that language that the child is already exposed to, and talk about how that language is inappropriate, how that language is unkind. But I won't tell them additional slurs. That's not necessary, right? I don't want to give them that additional piece. But a 15-year-old comes and says, this is what happened to me when I was online. Mm-hmm. Somebody showed this picture or called me this name online. And we can talk. We could talk about other names that people sometimes use. Have you ever heard of, do you know of any other names that people have used in a similar fashion to try to hurt people who look like you and me? And mm-hmm. the child will be able to tell you about other experiences. Well, it didn't happen to me, but my other friend talked about how somebody called them this. Oh, so essentially what I'm doing is I am orienting the child to the fact that these things exist. Now that we know that these things exist, what are some coping mechanisms? And we can talk about that. And I think the fact that you have a successful, supportive conversation leaves kids more likely or more inclined to want to come back to you again. Mm-hmm. So the tenor of the conversation is what leads kids back. You can tell a kid from now until your eyes turn blue that you could talk to me about anything. But whenever I tell you about anything, you fly off the handle and you get angry and you want to beat people up. I'm like, okay, I'm not telling you that next time.
Okay.
But if I come to you and I tell you something and you're like, oh wow, and how did you feel about that? And I help you kind of make sense of it without pulling in my own emotions in there, then I feel more comfortable coming back to you with something different. It may not even be about race. It may be about choosing my next song or a song that I like. Kids are mm-hmm. always testing us to figure out what is comfortable enough to bring to us. And how much they bring to us usually is a factor of how comfortable we've made it for them to bring stuff to us.
Mm-hmm. So say, for example, your child comes back to you and says something that is worth sort of talking to the school about. Do you let them know that you're talking to the school about it, or that you need to talk to the office or the principal? Or do you sort of keep that part to yourself and just quietly go and talk and have that discussion?
I think I'll answer that in this way. If you told me something, if you told me, Alvin, this person did this thing to me and it made me feel really horrible, and we talk about it like, yeah, this is how you could deal with it. Wow, I'm so sorry. And then you find out that I went to talk to this person's manager about it.
Mm-hmm.
You'd feel betrayed, right?
Yeah.
Even if you think to yourself, well, I know that he was trying to help, I still feel betrayed because I didn't tell you to tell anybody else this. You went off on your own. You didn't even involve me in this. So I say I kind of give this very kind of larger, weird experience to say this, that if a child shares something with you, they've let you into their world, and you should not take action without informing and including the child.
Okay.
Informing and including the child does not mean that it may be a situation where even if the child says no, you may still need to include the parent. So for example, I've had experiences in therapy where a child says, I smoked marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd think, oh, you must tell the parent about it. And of course I have to tell the parent about this. But I'm not going to be like, okay, thank you for telling me. So now that your mom is in the room or your dad is in the room, hey, mom, dad, he just told me he smoked marijuana. The child will never talk to me again.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do instead is to have a conversation. How would you like me to help you with this?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it'd be useful to talk to the teachers about this? Would you like to be there when I talk with the teachers about it? Is it okay if I talk to the teachers about it? And the child might say, no, because I'm scared that if you talk to them, they won't do anything. What else do you think I could do to help? And the kid may say nothing at all, don't do anything. And you have to kind of decide. If the child is being physically attacked, then it sounds like we need to go in. And so I'll tell you know what, I know it's scary and it may feel like nothing is going to happen, but to be able to set up a record that these things have happened and that we've connected with the school, I need to have a conversation with them. And here's what the conversation is going to look like. Here's what I'm going to say, and here's what I'm not going to say. Here's how I'm going to couch that conversation. And here's how I'm going to try to protect you in that conversation. So giving the child an understanding of the process and of the system. The child, one, feels that they've been centered and respected. Their privacy and their personhood has been respected. Two, they feel like they have a voice. And they do. They have a voice in this story. It's a story about me, and I have an input in this story. Three, they also learn how the system works and how the processes work. You've modeled for them how that process works.
Mm-hmm. And now, as a final sort of tip of advice, what are some actionable tips that you'd offer for parents seeking to implement positive parenting that counter discrimination and sort of promote a child's resilience and their own belonging?
I will say this, that your child is going to come across negative experiences, whether they be discrimination or otherwise. They're going to come across negative experiences wherever they happen to be. Mm-hmm. I come across negative experiences, and sometimes there's nobody involved in my negative experience. I go to park, and suddenly the parking meter doesn't work, and I can't find a different parking space. That's a negative experience. But at the end of the day, when I've dealt with my negative experiences, I go home and my spouse is present and loving and supportive. My kids are present and loving and supportive. My dog, my cat is present and loving and supporting. And I feel like I am rejuvenated. It is the parent's responsibility, because the home and the family is the first sense of the world. It is the parent's responsibility to make sure that they, first and foremost, are a source of love and support for a child. So that whenever a child thinks of, no matter what's going on in my life, who can I count on to love and support me? That should be the parent. Mm-hmm. And no matter what's going on at school, where can I go that I will know that I will receive love and support? That should be the home. So parents should make sure that the home always feels like a place that is supportive, accepting, loving, and comfortable for the child. And make sure that children also have a healthy understanding of their own identities, whether it be racial identities, whatever identities. Make sure that the child has a healthy understanding and appreciation for who they are and where they've come from. A healthy understanding that as a Black child, there's this history that has led to who you are, that has led to who I am. So that in spite of what other people might think about who they think you are, because they don't know you, in spite of what they might think of the fact that you have darker colored skin, you understand what this darker colored skin means. That there are grandparents and great-grandparents and great-grandfathers 10,000 years before whose experiences have led to who you are. And there's a general pride in that. That helps to counter some experiences of racial discrimination. So that, alongside a very strong supportive home, helps to counter quite a bit of the racial discrimination experiences, or at least the negative outcome of those.
So it allows the child to sort of understand that, okay, no matter what other people say, people can say whatever, but as long as you know what it means, who you are, and the fact that you have people around you that do support you and do care about you, then that's the only thing that really should be taken forth.
Yep. So I think I can't remember the name of the author. Who was that? Might be Rob Sellers. It might be somebody else. But a paper that's probably all the way maybe back in the 1990s, 1998, 2000, that show, and a number of other papers since then have shown that racial discrimination, and I can think of David Williams's work, racial discrimination experiences are directly related to significant negative physical and mental health outcomes, including things like heart attacks and strokes and obesity and depression and anxiety and PTSD are related to discrimination experiences. But that positive racial identity, specifically racial pride and a sense of belonging, help to attenuate that negative interaction, so that if an individual feels welcome and part of a group and feels proud of membership to that group, then the discrimination experience does not have the same negative effect or the same negative implications for them.
Okay. No, that definitely makes sense, especially when going through an everyday practice. Now, speaking of everyday practices, this moves on to our next part of the show, which is practice and habits. So what is a practice that you do to motivate yourself in everyday life?
I want to say eat ice cream, but I'm not sure if that's going to count.
Oh, I would love that answer.
A practice that I do in everyday life to motivate myself. I think I'm always thinking, always mindful of the next generation. I'm very aware of what has been passed down to me through my grandparents, through my parents, through persons like Cleopatra Caldwell and Albert Kane and others who've mentored me. I'm very aware of what's been passed on to me. And I'm very aware of people like Samuel Gonzalez and Aaron Clark and my nephew, Rashad Thomas and Megan Thomas. I think of Micaiah De Silva and all these young kids and people who I have a connection with, who I think of it as my responsibility to make sure that whatever challenges I may have gone through, they're going to go through similar challenges. They're going to look very different, but the same crisis is what they're going to have to deal with. And because I have walked that path before, and because those other persons who have walked the path before me have passed down to me it is my responsibility to make sure that I am both physically and healthily present, but also I'm also mentally present to be able to pass on to those lives, to be able to make sure that those lives have the possibility of positive outcomes. And so whenever I'm going through my day, whether it be a fun day or a stressful day, I'm always thinking of how is my life connected to other people, and how can I be of service to other people? And even when I might feel like I don't want to talk to anybody, I just want to just relax and watch TV, I think to myself, maybe I should take this interview because of who it might potentially help, what one generation I could possibly change, or what one individual I could possibly help if I do this interview, or if I have this meeting, or if I do this thing.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the challenges that you find yourself experiencing when trying to motivate yourself?
Time. there never seems to be enough time. I woke up this morning and I was like, wow, it feels like Friday already. There's just so much that has to be done. There's never enough time. People, as much as you may want to help individuals, people aren't always at the point where they recognize that they need help. Mm-hmm. And that can be frustrating because you're at a point where I see where you're going, and I'd like to step in and provide assistance. I want to help you. And they're like, nope, I'm good. Everything is good. Like, no, you're not good. You just don't realize that you're not good yet. So sometimes that can be frustrating. But understanding that people are human beings and they're carrying their weight the best way they know how. And sometimes you have to let people come to that point where they decide that, yes, I need help, and ask for help. They're more likely to appreciate that help when they come to terms of need for that. When they come to terms of their need for that help on their own, rather than you forcing it on them.
Mm-hmm. See, you're better than me. I have constant interventions with a lot of friends on so many different things. So no, I think that's a little bit of a harder practice to sort of go through.
Hard. It's very hard. Yeah.
Especially being a psychologist as well. You in the know, like, you know a lot about it, to the fact that, okay, I have a friend who also recognizes sort of, she doesn't diagnose people, but she's sort of just like, you have this kind of symptom, you kind of got like an ADHD, but she doesn't want to say it out loud. So she just like goes ahead and silently diagnose people very quietly. So it's very interesting. I sometimes can see her just staring at someone and just, okay, should I say it? Should I not? Should I tell them? So no, it's I'm admiring a lot of people who are psychologists, a lot of my friends who are psychologists as well, who know but still unable to be the ones to let other people know and sort of just let them figure out on their own. So yeah, I think I hear my friends sort of quietly complaining about it constantly.
Yeah, you can't help people who don't know that they want help or that they need help. You have to let people come to it on their own terms.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Now, this leads us perfectly into the open mic section of the show. This allows you to talk about something that you are passionate about, that you feel maybe we didn't get to discuss even further in today's episode. But yeah, for the last minute or so, I'd love to give you the floor and get to share what's on your mind today.
So thanks for that. I think what I want to share is acutely related to what we've been talking about, which is positive youth development, parenting, discrimination, race issues. So I explore online racial discrimination among adolescents and how that affects them, trying to make parallels to analog or in-person discrimination. But I also do some work on fatherhood. And that's also very keenly attached to the Black Fatherhood Podcast. So I'm interested in understanding fathers' engagement in a number of service provider spaces. So are fathers allowed and are fathers genuinely engaged in different services related to their children, but also some of the potential benefits for father engagement as well as father involvement. So engagement I think of as the father connecting to the service provider. Involvement I think of as the father being intricately involved in the life of his child and the life of his family. And trying to understand how those pieces come together in a way to specifically challenge the assumptions that are had, to challenge the stereotypes that are had about Black fathers specifically, and to adjust the narrative, to lay hold to that narrative of Black fathers not being involved, Black fathers having abdicated their roles, Black fathers not being interested in their children. That is not what the research is telling us. In fact, the research is telling us that across the board, Black fathers are the most involved in about 12 or 13 different forms of engagement or nurturing of their children, and that nurturing continues as the child goes through these different developmental stages. So Black fathers have been doing a ton of work, and society has been treating them as invisible. Black fathers are present. Black fathers have been doing the work, are continuing to do the work, are interested in doing the work. And while we want to celebrate Black fathers, we don't want it to we're not saying throw a parade for Black fathers. We're saying recognize that Black fathers are doing this work, and let's stop this pernicious lie that Black fathers are not present and are not involved in their families.
No, I think that's such a great work, and I feel like it's definitely something that does need to be discussed. So I'm glad that there is a discussion out there, because I have a lot of friends who are sort of in that position. They hear jokes a lot of the time about fathers being not there, or sort of running away or leaving them. And there's that whole sort of idea that, okay, this is what is understood about Black fathers. And that's like a very different conversation. It's a very different real life situation that is sort of does need to be countered, because you hear a lot of in movies and in film, in the media, there's a whole sort of understanding that that they're the butt of the joke. But there's a whole group of people who are being fathers, who are probably a lot more being more fathery than a lot of other fathers of different races. I think there's this sort of understanding that, or misunderstanding that just because we're joking about them doesn't mean that it's necessarily true.
I think it's our responsibility to stop the joking, because the joking does not have any. The joking has turned up to be damaging. So maybe stop that joke. The joke has become so pervasive and insidious that we see it even in child programming. The Lion King, one of Disney's first movies about Black people, technically, or about Africans. And what's the core of it? It's a father who stepped away from the child.
Yeah.
Even in something as basic as The Lion King, you think of a number of different spaces where the butt of the joke is that your father went to the store and never came back. Now, Esau Macaulay does an excellent job of talking about his own experience of his father doing just that, and talking about how the absence of his father shaped him. The presence of his mother also shaped him. But he talks about how to step in a situation like that and learn forgiveness and to extend grace and mercy to an individual who may not deserve it. But for every Black father you tell me that you know of who has walked away and not been involved in his child's life in any way, I can point you to multiple fathers who are doing the opposite. And the assumption usually is that a father who does not live in the home with his child has walked away from his child. And that's not always true.
No, yeah.
Non-resident or not sharing the same residence is not the same as uninvolved. You have fathers who don't share the same home for a number of different reasons, romantic reasons, parents break up for different reasons, but that father remains integral in the child's life, not just financially, remains integral in the child's development. But that does not always show up in the research.
No, that's true. I think there's this one movie that really showed the real life situation. It was the movie by Kevin Hart, The Fatherhood.
That's what I was thinking about too.
That has been when I saw that, I think that became one of my favorite viewpoints on fatherhood, and one of the ones that counted so many people viewpoint. And that was such a great step in the right direction that I think society is needing to go in now. And I think that was the minute that movie came out, the minute we're talking about this, I was like, that's the movie that I was like, what's that Kevin Hart movie? Because it counteracted so many different of even my own viewpoints that I didn't know I had until the minute I saw that, and answered so many different questions. And it changed my perspective on so many different things. No, that's fine. It's just it changed my viewpoint on a lot of when it comes to not just on the minority sense, but on the idea of a single father and what a single father actually goes through. And it's because I hear about the single mothers so often, but the single father is something that you don't really hear of. So it counted so many different understanding of what it means to be a parent, not just a mother or father, but just a parent as a whole.
Agreed. I think Will Smith's I Am Legend, and what's that movie he did where he's the homeless dad with his son?
Pursuit of Happiness?
Pursuit of Happiness. Yep, yeah. That one. I think all of those are really great movies. I think Bill Cosby's, the Cosby Show was instrumental in changing America's view, or instrumental in an incremental way of giving a more positive view of the Black family in America. Mm-hmm. Kevin Hart's movie and The Pursuit of Happiness and other movies like that, I think, have the potential of opening up a storm drain, or opening up a floodgate of movies that are going to try to push the envelope and advance the more positive, more typical and normal narrative of Black fatherhood and of fatherhood in general. And I'm looking forward to the day when that is the case.
No, I'm looking forward to it as well. And if you haven't seen those movies, definitely go and check them out, because they will change the way that you think, or they answer so many questions. Well, thank you so much, Alvin, for sort of coming onto the show and talking about your, not only your experiences, but also how to sort of counter a lot of other parents' experiences that they're sort of dealing with their child, and when it comes to discrimination. If there's a way that audience members want to get in contact with you to either ask questions that I haven't asked, or to ask more deeply into their own perspective, is there contact information that I'm able to give out to them?
Sure. They can definitely find me anywhere on social media. We have an Instagram. We have multiple Instagram pages. So we have an Instagram page for my research lab. That's Dr_AT at 758, and I can give you those afterwards. We have an Instagram page for the podcast. We have a YouTube page for the podcast, a YouTube page for the lab. We have a Twitter page. We have a LinkedIn page. We have a website. We have 2 websites. And of course, people can always find me at the university's email. I can share that with you as well.
That's perfect. Oh, well, I'm definitely going to have those links down below, just for easy access for all our audience. Thank you again so much, Alvin, for joining me on the show today and for talking about this.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. And if you guys definitely go and check out Alvin's podcast as well. I think it's going to show so many different perspectives, so many different real life stories as well, which is always really important to sort of see the real life perspective as in addition to a lot of the research.
Yeah, you will not be disappointed, because the podcast is fun. There's some really, really great stories on there. So just search for the Black Fatherhood Podcast. You will not be disappointed.
Okay, perfect. I will have that in the link below, because I definitely want to listen to it now that I've spoken to you as well. So thank you guys so much for listening. I'll see you all in the next episode. You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargent. Thanks for tuning in.